All right, so this is the D class. We're just a little behind the other F class, and we are, we'll probably catch up to them soon. But we're looking at questions 47 and 49. 47, how are triads present in Virgil's explanation or remainder of hell? Well, here's one. He talks, the entire discussion is about these three circles. So that's a triad right there. And then he talks about the three rings of circle 7. That's also a triad. And that's what we're reading right now. But this was, there were two groups of threes, and probably more if you wanted to find them. We said about number 48, remember that incontinence seems less guilty, seems less severe because it's a matter of weakness, human weakness, not stubborn insistence. You know, people aren't, they're just addicted to these kinds of sins, and they can't stop it. It's a little less severe, at least in the thinking of Aristotle and the church. 49, why is usury a crime? And this is what is, we're going to see it in a minute when we read it. But usury is a crime, remember, because you're supposed to make money, a living, one of two ways. By nature, like nature produces things and we can live off the land, or by labor, working. Whatever you do, people have to work. The Bible, by the way, confirms that work is a good thing. There was work before there was sin in the world. And so anybody that doesn't work for a living, there may be some medical reasons and so forth, but most people should, because we were meant to. Those are the two ways, by nature or by art or labor. The problem with usury is it involves neither one, because money by nature doesn't reproduce. And it requires no work to charge interest. You're giving somebody money and you're charging them for your money. You're charging them, you're buying your money. You're buying $100, it'll cost you $125 to buy your money. And it's bad because it requires no work and it doesn't involve nature. In fact, it's unnatural. Today we don't see a problem with charging interest, but this is the thinking of the day. All right, so we are now in the first ring, the neighbors, violence against neighbors. I think we're at the top of the page. No, we're not. We're line 50. We're near the bottom of the page. So we'll start with line 49. Remember, the Minotaur is there. What does he represent? He's half man, half bull. He represents that perverted mixture, as do the centaurs, of man and animal. Violence is bestial. That's another word for it. It's the ring of bestiality or violence. We become animals when we become violent. And that's why it's a sin. And so half man, half bull reminds us, we are talking about people, but people that are acting like animals. And how do they get down the precipice that
They make it go to fury and they like slip past it.
they get around the Minotaur? But how do they get down right, which was the tumbled rocks caused by Christ when the earthquake, when Christ entered limbo? Hell shook, and this is a part of that. So they're able to climb down. Even thinks about details like that. How do you get from point A to point B? You have to have a way, and so he comes up with that. Yeah.
Did we just answer number 50?
We may have.
Yeah.
Centaurs are like the Minotaur. They're mixtures, and they're a mixture of human and animal. Just simply put, that's that he's trying to convey. It's humans that act like animals. Yeah.
I'm sorry, can I go to the bathroom?
Sure. Would you read for us? Would you start, he's going to start, Grace's going to start on line 49, make it 40. That's line 50. Make it line 49. Oh, blind rash and wicked lust.
O blind and rash and wicked lust of spoil that drives our short life with so keen a goad, and steeps our life eternal in such broil. I saw a river curving full and broad, arc-wise, as though the whole plain's girth embracing, just as my guide had told me on the road, and twist the bank, and it came centaurs racing by one and one, their bows and quivers bearing, as when through the woods of the world they went a-chasing. They checked their flight to watch us downward faring, and three of the band wheeling out and stood a row, their bows and chosen arrows first preparing, and one cried out from far, "Hey, whither go you on the cliff there? What's your penalty? Speak where you stand, if not, I draw the bow." The master shouted back, the word shall be for Chiron there, headstrong thou dost remain, and so thou ever wast, the worse for thee. Then nudging me, that Nessus, who was slain for fair Deianira, and in the aftermath with his own blood avenged his blood again. Gazing upon his breast betwixt them both, Achilles' tutor, the great Chiron, stands. The third is Pholus, once so full of wrath. All around the fosse they speed in myriad bands, shooting at every soul that tries to life higher out of the blood than doom demands.
All right, that's a good place to pause. So here in this first ring of the seventh circle is the river Phlegethon. These are the tyrants. We talked about that. Well, we're talking about it now. No, we've talked about it. The tyrants are the example of these violent people. And how are they being punished? They're being punished by being in the river of boiling blood. Why is that appropriate? What did they do in life? They shed blood of innocent people, so they have to be tormented forever in a river of boiling blood. What happens if they try to get out? The centaurs shoot at them. And notice there are 3 centaurs, and that's another triad if it asked you that.
Wait, where was that triad?
Starting in line 67, there are 3 centaurs, Nessus, line 71, Chiron, and line 72, Pholus. And remember, Chiron, you may not remember this, but it reminds us here, was Achilles' tutor. That doesn't really play a role here, but that's who he is.
If they shoot you, what happens? Because you're in blood.
You have to suspend disbelief a little bit. It does, in the world of Dante, that does prevent people from getting out. So I guess it's painful. And again, they have no bodies, but they feel pain.
Okay. Maybe like shoots them back into the water.
Well, it does.
Blood.
That's the point. Would you read for us, Andrew, line 76? The word Snell here,
What page are we on?
page 144. I think we did. Why are they appropriate? Yeah, we've answered it. Number 50. And we did 51 as well,
Line 70 what?
6. So we answered 51. Who makes up the triad of centaurs? We named all 3.
Chiron, Nessus, and
And how are they connected to the circle of sin? It's probably more to that. We don't really need to know. But remember we said they're half animal, half human, so that's a picture of bestiality, humans that act like animals. I think that's enough. All right, read to the bottom.
We are near them now. Those creatures smelt snell and swift, and Chiron took an arrow, and with the notch put upon his jaw his soury drift. Of beard, and having freed his great mouth, watch, said he to those who stood with him. Mark you how the feet of them behind you move what they touch.
So who's he referring to?
The people being tormented.
he's talking about Dante, how the feet of the one behind moves what they touch. Why does Dante's feet? Because he's got a physical human body, and so he notices that. Charon does, and stops him.
Those of the dead are not used so to do, and by good guide, now watching at this breast,
Standing
at his breast, where two natures join, replied. Quite true, he is alive, so on his lonely quest, needs must I heed him through the veils of night. Necessity brings him there, here, not sport nor jest. From the singing of alleluias in the light, came he who laid on me this novel charge. The man's no poacher, I'm no thievish sprite. Now by the power that moves my steps at large on this wild way, send us a courier, whom we may follow by the river's marge.
Did you read one more at the top?
To show us where the ford is, and to bear the other upon his back across the tide, for he's no spirit to walk with the empty air.
Virgil talks to Charon, seems to be the leader. Virgil talks about why Dante's here. He mentions she being Beatrice, but he says we got to cross the river. We need direction. So would you give us a courier? It says whom we can follow, and somebody that Dante can ride across the boiling blood of rivers, which he cannot walk across. All right, so we'll go to, yeah. All right, we'll lodge them in, yeah.
Use the restroom.
Yeah, when he gets back. Somebody's out there. We're out there.
So can we answer number 52?
I don't know, what does it say?
Says, why do you think Chiron is so readily receptive Virgil's explanation of why Dante's in?
No, we can't.
They could just say this one.
I think what we can say at this point is that he notices that he's a physical human being. That may be all we'll have to work with. This guy, I just noticed he bears weight in hell. What's going on here? And Dante explained, well, that's because he's not dead. That may be other reasons you could come up with, but that could be one. All right, Lazaman.
Then Chiron turned on his right flank and cried, wheel round and guide the Nessus. If you're met by another patrol, see that it stands aside. So with this trusty escort, off we set along the bank of the bubbling crimson flood, once the shrieks of the boiled rose shrill and desperate. There I saw some, plunged eyebrow deep they stood, and the great centaur said to me, behold tyrants who gave themselves to ravin and blood. Here they bewail oppressions manifold, Alexander's here, Dionysius too, whose brute fury long years vexed Sicily uncontrolled. That forehead there, with locks as black as soot, as Alino, and that fair-headed one, of Viso d'Este, he whose light was put out. Up above there, by his stepson the sun. I turned here to the poet who said, why yes, he first, I second now, must guide beyond.
Okay, thank you. What does it mean to ford a river?
To go across it.
Yes, at what point in the river?
Just like the middle? Or, cause,
Shallowest part?
Yes. You're not swimming, you're not crossing over a bridge, you're actually walking across the river, and you can't do that unless it's shallow enough. And those places on rivers are called fords. Can be a verb. It means to ford a river. So that's what they've done. These are the tyrants, and I think there's a little more here. If you want, would you read that, Julia? Julie.
line 112.
Further along, I think.
Oh. Further along, the centaur checked his pace beside a second gang, who seemed to start far as the throat from the stream's boiling race. He showed one shape set by itself apart, saying, there stands the man who dared to smite, even in the very bosom of God, the heart they venerate still on the Thames. Still on Thames.
Things.
Is that a name of a river?
Where are you?
Line 121. Is it the river or a name?
And we're not talking about this yet.
Davis River?
It's pronounced the Thames.
That's normally pronounced Thames, not Thames. It may have an A sound, but it sounds to us, every time I hear it, it's like it's an I. So think of the word T-I-M with an S on it, Thames. That is the major river that runs through London. You've seen pictures of London and the Tower of, what's that thing called? The Tower of London, London Bridge. That crosses the Thames River. Dickens, all his stories talk about the Thames. And so it runs all the way to the sea. So I don't know exactly who he's talking about there, but it's something or somebody that is connected with the Thames, which means he's British.
Okay, so that's right, cool. Next, reared up upright, both head and chest from the stream, another board appeared, full many known to me by sight. Thus shallow and shallower still the red blood poured, till it was only deep enough to cook the feet. And here it was we passed the ford. And the centaur said to me, now prithee look, just as the side it ever grows less deep. On that I'd have thee know, the boiling brook lowers its rocky bed, down shelving steep, until it comes full circle, and joins its ring there where the tyrants are condemned to weep. Here doth the heavenly justice rack and reign, here is Sextus, here over it bears the scourge of the earth called Attila the King. And here forever it mills the trickling tears squeezed by the scald from those rough highwaymen, the Pasian and the Quarantan. With this he turned and crossed the ford again.
So, we're now through that first circle, the first ring, which is the river Phlegethon. Turn the page, and we're gonna enter the second ring, which is the wood of suicide. And there's more than just suicide involved here, and we'll see that in a minute. Dominic, would you like to read the story and the text here? Yeah, and we can get you next.
Poets enter a pathless wood. Here harpies sit shrieking among the withered trees, which enclose the souls of suicides. Here delve Demure tells Dante's story, and also explain how these shades come to be changed into trees, and what will happen to their bodies at the last day. The shades of two profligates rush through the wood, pursued and torn by black hounds. Dante speaks to a bush containing the soul of a Florentine. Rear Nessus have regained the Pantheon, in addition to a forest where no mark of any beaten path was to be found. No green here, with its colored leaves and dark, the tender shoots but within and out and tough. No fruit, poison galls of the withered bark. Wild beasts from till to pasture sleeping off. Twigs Cecina and Corvetto never come to lurk in scrubs with tangled boars so rough. There the foul harpy's nest lie at home. We chase the Trojans from Strophes, with dismal outcry ominous of doom. Wide winged like birds and many faced are these, with feathered belly rod and claws of steel, and there they sit and shriek on the strange trees. And the good master thus began, Fear well, dear, going further, thou should understand, thou art now in the second ring, and shalt be till thou comest to the abominable sand. And now look well, and see if they whose telling might fill my credit with thee out of hand. Already all around I heard a mournful wailing, but seeing none to wail I stopped short, blinking bewilderedly, as though my wits were failing. I think he must have thought that I was thinking, that all these voices through the pools resounding, were those of folks who from our days had shrinking.
Mind reading just the next tercet.
Because he said, if from these boughs is bounding, thou wilt pluck off from small and single spreading, thou flocks will stagger at their own confounding.
All right, so we are now in the wood of suicide. What we have here are people who committed suicide, obviously, but also people that will just group together in the term gambling. We talked about yesterday about you do damage to yourself when you kill yourself. Also, when you waste your property. If it's a sin to waste and to vandalize and steal other people's property, if that's a sin, it's just as much a sin to waste and your own property, which gambling is an example of. Occasionally people win, but they're basically throwing their money away, they're destroying their resources, and so they group those into the same category. Harpies, you remember who harpies were?
They're bird ladies.
Right, and in this case, the punishment is that the person who killed himself or herself cannot have his body, right, because he destroyed it. And so he sinned against his body, he can never have his body again. So in Dante, he becomes a tree. And the tree talks and thinks and speaks. And the harpies come and pull the limbs and leaves off the trees, which causes him torment, because the limbs and the twigs and everything, they are now part of his new body, which is a tree. And you understand why that sin is punished that way? You no longer are right to your body because you killed it. So that's what's happening here. The tree speaks because there's somebody in it. That person is this guy right here, Pierre del Vigne. We'll get to know him and his story. And we'll go with Ben.
Because he said, if from these bows bounding thou wilt pluck off one, small and simple spray, thy thoughts will stagger at their own dumbfounding.
Virgil said, why don't you pull that spray, those leaves off that tree and see what happens. So he's going to do that.
So I put my head forth a little way, and broke a branchlet from a thorn tree tall, and the trunk cried out, why tear my limbs away? Then it grew dark with blood, and therewithal cried out again, why dost thou rend my bones? Breathes no pity in thy breast at all? We that are turned to trees were once human once. Nay, thou shouldest tender a more pious hand, though we had been souls of scorpions. As when you burn one end of green brand, sap at the other oozes from the wood, sizzling as the imprisoned airs expand. So from that broken splint came words and blood at once. I dropped the twig, and like to no one, rooted to the ground with terror. There I stood, a wounded soul, my sage replied anon. Might I have brought him straight away to believe that one thing he bred in my verse alone, never had he lifted finger to mischief. Be thus, 'twas incredible, so I prompted his deed, for which myself must grieve. But tell him who thou wast, that he may try for some amends, to right thee with mankind, when by permission he returns on high.
So Virgil talks to the tree, say, why are you hurting me? Why are you breaking my limbs off? We call these limbs, our arms and legs are our limbs, and here it's literal. These are literally the limbs of the tree. And so, I guess then at this point, this man, his name is Pierre del Vigne, will speak and tell his story. Why did he end up in hell? Why did he kill himself? Normally we don't know the answer to those questions. That's why we talked about this, why suicide is so awful. We don't know, I can't imagine. That's the last person I would think. What was he thinking? Why did he do it? And usually there's no answer, which is one of the awful things about it. So we can get an answer this time. So, Jacob, would you read? No, you hadn't finished, right? Did you finish?
We may just go to the end. Right?
Yeah, that'd be good. And then Jacob can read.
To this the trunk made answer. Words so come tempt me to speech, nor take it off in an ill part. If at some length I'm learned to speak my mind, I am he that held both keys of Frederick's heart, to lock and to unlock. Well I knew to turn them with so exquisite an art. I kept this counsel and let few men through, loyal to my glorious charge that I remain, and sacrificed my sleep and my strength too.
All right, so this man is, I'll tell you who he is. He was an advisor to the emperor, maybe the Holy Roman Emperor of the time, Frederick. He was an advisor, a close advisor, the best friend type advisor to the king. That's just the start of the story. Jacob, see what happened.
But that great Harlaw with him there refrained from Caesar's household with her adulterous eyes, devised the king's courts and the common band, inflamed all hearts against me, and these likewise, inflamed Augustus to distress, till my glad arms turned to
Obloquy.
So, in a scornful spirit of disgust, and thinking to escape from scorn by death, to my just self I made myself
Okay, you can read some more, but let's pause there. Look at the question. We've done 53, we know who's being punished and why. If 54, explain what happens to suicides when they die, as well as their turn, we're gonna learn a little more about number 54. So let's pause just a minute, write this guy's name down. There are a number of names, I'll give them to you on the review sheet, which I'll just give you tomorrow, give you a week to start working on it. His name is Pierre Del Vigne. He was the counselor to Frederick, the emperor, and jealous people lied about him and said he was a traitor, and the king had him put in prison. He was unjustly imprisoned, and because that was so hard for him to handle, he killed himself. And that's what he said, to my just self, I made myself unjust. What does he mean by that?
Because he's not honorable, I guess.
What does he mean to my just self? They was in jail.
He was already, he had done nothing.
He'd done nothing wrong. He was still not guilty of anything. But then he became guilty of something when he killed himself. So that's what he's saying. And what does he ask Dante to do, or Virgil to do, Dante? Yeah, make sure people don't forget me, and we've talked about that. That was an important thing for people in hell, even in mythology. They didn't want to be forgotten. If you're forgotten, you cease to exist, something like that. You want to keep reading, Jacob, or pass it? All right, so Olivia, would you read
Yeah, where do we end?
line 82, and I?
Ask thou whatever thou thinkest will do my hunger good and satisfy me well. I cannot ask, pity hearts me so. Wherefore, so may this man prove liberal. Thus he resumed, thine errand to perform imprisonment's spirit, did thou be pleased to tell how souls get crammed into these this naughty form. And if thou canst, if thou shalt do these limbs one day, find release therefrom. At this the trunk blew hard, and the windy puff after this wise whistle into speech. You shall be answered with brief words now.
Okay, he asked Del Vigne two things. He says, how did you get here? How do people get here? Physically, how did you get all the way down here? And then he asked, when the second coming happens, when the resurrection happens, are you going to get your body back? If you don't have one now, will you get it back at some point? And here's his answer.
Can you write this down?
Yeah.
Okay. When the wild soul leaps from the body, which is owned by violence, forces it to flee. Midas dispatches it down to the seventh pitch. So it falls to the wood, no place is picked for it, but as chance carries it, there it falls to be, and where it falls it sprouts like a cord of wheat, and grows into a sapling, and thence to a wild tree. And the harpies feed on its leaves, and the sharp bite gives agony, and a vent to agony. We shall take our flight, we all souls take their flight, to seek our spoils, but not to be rearranged, for the spoils of the spoiler cannot be his by right. Here shall we drive them to this gloomy glade, here shall they hang, with each body evermore born of its own self-slaughtering
Okay,
shade.
we can pause there. Okay, the answer to both questions, like how did you get here? And how does anybody, physically, we know they go to hell because their sin and everything, but how do they get in, how do they find the place that they're supposed to be? What? Well, part of it is chance. Remember, Minos sends everybody where they go. We saw him in Circle 2, and he throws people. He really takes them and throws them where they go, and they end up in the right place. But what's the chance is where do they fall? They fall in the wood of suicides and become a tree. The second question is, will they get their bodies back? Will they get their bodies back when the second coming happens? And he said, well, yes and no. we'll get our bodies back, but we can't inhabit it. We will drag our body, I don't know how they do that, but they drag their body
While
and
it's still a tree.
the body hangs from my limb. So here's the tree, and hanging from the body, from the limb of the tree, is his physical body, which he has to look at for eternity. And why is this appropriate?
Shows it as it's like he killed himself.
He sinned,
No, no.
he sinned against it. He sinned against that body, so he has to be reminded forever of that sin. All right, then it gets kind of interesting here in a hurry. You want to keep reading or pass it?
I will be reading.
Okay.
Thinking the truck might wish to tell us more, we stood into it, but suddenly there came a crashing on our astonished ears, a wild uproar. As the huntsman hears the boar and the chase dashing down on his post like the noise of a hurricane, with trampling of leaves and all branches smashing. And lo, on the left of us came two that ran naked and tore with such a furious burst as snapped to flinders every forest man. O death, come now, come quickly. Thus the first, and the second, finding himself outstripped in the rush, cried, Leno, my legs were not so nimble ere at the joust of Taco. So the last pushed his breath failing perhaps, he shot sidelong and made one groove with himself a thick bush. And filling the woods behind them came a throng of great black race
There's some kind of dog.
crutches. Fleet on foot and grim, and keen and gray as greyhounds fresh slit from the throng. They seized the sulker and set their teeth at him and rent him piecemeal, and away they went, carrying the wretched fragments limb by limb. Then my guide drew me by the hand and bent down, and bent his steps to the poor bush, left mangled there, gasping vain protest through each being rent. Oh, Giacomo, it cried, oh, say, Andrea, why make a screen of me? What was the good? Am I to blame for thy pestilent career? Then said my gentle master when he stood beside it, who wast thou that, though such tattered wounds slidest out thy grief mingled with blood? O spirits who come in time to see me battered thus shamefully in all my foliage torn, it said, bring back the leaves that lie there scattered, gather them close beneath the shrub, foreign lord. My city was she that the Baptist changed her ancient patron, wherefore on her scorn still by his art he makes himself avenge. Yea, did not Arno's bridge even now retain some image of the guardian she estranged? Those citizens who built her walls against on the ashes left by Attila, and had been baffled wholly, and all their labor spent in vain. I am the one that made my own retreat.
So we've answered all the questions here, but not yet. These two, write them down. All right, Giacomo and Lano. These are the two guys known as the profligates. Profligates means wasteful. The prodigal son was a profligate. He wasted his father's estate. So Giacomo and Lano come running through the scene. They've been talking to this tree, and all of a sudden these two guys come running. One, Lano, gets ripped in shreds by the dogs, and the other, Giacomo, jumps into a bush to try to hide, but he also gets pulled, and the bush talks to him. Who are these people, and what do they represent? Giacomo, the one that jumps in the bush, was a real person. He liked to burn his own and other people's houses. It was a vandal. And then Lano, he sold his estate and did his friends, and they wasted all the money, and then he joined the army and died in battle. So these are examples of gamblers, and to think there's not a reality to this. He sold his estate, wasted the money, and died in battle. Just yesterday they found that prison guard in Alabama. I don't know where they found her, but remember she ran away with the 6 foot 9 inch murderer, and they both ran away. Right before they ran away, she had filed for retirement, sold her house at half the value, so she had about $100,000 in cash. They live about 2 weeks. Police called them yesterday. The car crashed. She kills herself, or I don't know if they were absolutely sure of that. I think she killed herself, and he's back in jail. Listen to what she did. She sold her estate. She wasted the money and she killed herself. It happens. It's like real life.
Thank you.
Yeah, see ya. Yeah, let me.